Okay, good afternoon once again. So for today, we'll go ahead and discuss this entirely new module in computer programming 12A. So for today, we will discuss what we call the layout managers. Alright, so I hope you're ready and your IntelliJ or NetBeans are prepared sa background ninyo para at least nasasabayan nyo ako sa pagkocode later on. Now, let's talk about layout. When we say layout, in terms of Java programming, it is actually the way on how you arrange your components. But when we say components naman, we already know that these are actually the different elements that we are placing inside what we call the container. Okay? Layout, it could be said that layout is placing the components at a particular position within the container. And the task of layout, the controls, is done automatically by layout manager. So in this discussion, we will really focus on how we will try to use what we call the layout manager. So, subukan nating i-position sila properly on the JFrame or inside the JFrame. Unlike last week kasi, when I discussed what we call the nested panels, as is siya, di ba? Kung natatandaan yung discussion natin. When we place the sub-panels inside the JFrame, as is siya, we didn't really use any particular layout managers. Hindi siya sakto yung pagkaka-place niya. So for today, we have here what we call the layout managers. It automatically positions all of those components within the container. Java provides various layout managers to position the controls such as the following. So titignan natin ito mamaya. Paano nga ba natin gagamitin? Si size, shape, and arrangement. Okay? So we can arrange some layouts, say for example, or some containers sa mismong JFrame natin, either sa top, sa may upper left, sa may lower right, and yan, or lower right and lower left. So, the purpose of this one is actually for us to be prepared sa ating final project in which you will create a very simple version of your midterm big task. Pero this time, gagamit kayo ng mga layout managers and so on. Okay, so tingnan natin itong mga to. We have the following out layout manager classes na gagamitin natin. We have the border layout, card layout, flow, grid bag, group, and spring layout. So, first of all, let's talk about what we call the border layout. So, tingnan natin ha. The border layout simply divides the following containers into 5 areas which include the following. So, meron ka dyang page start, may page end, may line start, may center, and may line end ka dyan. So, tignan natin kung paano nga ba natin siya may implement by looking at the example code na meron tayo. Okay? So, let's go ahead and create this code na binigay ko dito. This is only an example and let me explain what is happening inside this one. So, since we are creating a Java program that uses a GUI or graphical user interface, remember that we have to import the javax.swing. Okay, we also have to import the java.out package in which all of the layout managers are inside. Okay, so next, ipalakihin ko ng konti itong code natin para makita natin. Alright, so inside this main method is where we will go ahead and instantiate an object which is what we call the JFrame frame. Yan. So meron tayong constructor na ginagawa dito in which we gave that a name as frame. Now, inside the JFrame, we will also put here a title which is yan, border layout demo. Tapos alam naman natin na in order for us to see the frame, we have to set first the default close operation into exit on close. Remember, the purpose on this one is for us to have the cross. Diba? Itong X na to, para maging clickable yan later on, kung natatandaan nyo yung discussion natin last week. Diba? We will also set the size. Okay? Or dimension of the frame into 500 by 200. And also, we will go ahead and set its visibility into true. Para kapag nirun na natin yan, makikita na natin yung basic frame kung saan ilalagay natin lahat ng panels, okay? And we will try to also apply the border layout na tinatawag natin. Yan. So, that's a very basic. Alam na natin kung paano mag-declare or maglagay ng frame sa mismong code natin. Alright? So, next here is this time, maglalagay tayo ng tinatawag na buttons. So, let me introduce to you what we call the JButtons. So far, we have JFrame, JLabels, okay? We have JPanels, and today, discuss ko rin sa inyo ang JButton. Pero hindi pa to clickable for now. Okay? Pakita ko lang sa inyo na pwede tayong gumawa or maglagay ng button dito. So, JButton, okay, para ka lang ding nag-i-instantiate ng object. Pero this time, you are using the JButton. So, JButton, and let's try to add here a title of that one. And button 1, page underscore start. Yan. Now, since we have here a JButton, or the first button, we will now try to create the panel kung saan natin ilalagay yung mismong button na yan. JPanel is equal to JPanel new border layout. Now, using this particular method here, border layout, basically what we are trying to do here is telling that our panel will be using what we call the border layout. Okay? So, imagine, meron kayong frame. Sa loob ng frame na yon, maglalagay tayo ng panel. Sa loob ng panel na yon, ilalagay natin yung button na yon. Tapos yung panel na yon, ilalagay natin sa mismong frame. Okay. So, okay na tayo dito. Ngayon, we will try to add the button na ginawa natin kanina, which is the btn1. Okay. Button 1. And this time, you have to use what we called the border layout object. And the page start, yan, the page start object naman. So far hindi pa gagana to. Okay? So far hindi pa gagana to. In order for us to make this work, we have to put the panel, okay? Put the panel inside. Yan. We have to put the panel inside the frame. So if we will try to run that, let's try to see what the border layout that page start looks like. Ayun. So kung napansin nyo, we have created a button here that has a title, page underscore start. Okay. Now, we also have created a panel where this button will be placed inside. Pero yung panel na yun, gumagamit ng tinatawag natin na border layout. So, using this border layout.page start, okay, nandiyan na siya. And since we added a panel here, we added a button inside the panel, and the panel was added inside the frame using the getContent pane method. I hope you understood that. Okay, so kung may question kayo, just simply message nyo lang dito. So you notice, every time we are changing the size of the JFrame, yung button sumasama din. Okay, next, let's create another button here. Oops, copy ko lang to. Let's create another button here, which is button 2. Pero this time, we will be using what we call the center. Yan. So, same goes through here. Let's add that btn2. Pero instead of page start, we will now be using the center. Okay, so if we will try to run that, you have to expect that there is this second button, pero naka-align siya sa center. Ayun. Kita nyo? Naka-align siya sa center. Technically, it's still center, but then it's below the page start. Ayan. Button yan, so clickable dapat yan. Okay? Next, let's create another button here. Button number 3. And this time, instead of having a center, let's place that on the left part, which is the line start. And let's add that btn3 border layout. Oops. Dot line start. Okay. So let's run that. And let's see kung anong itsura ni line start. Yan. So nakita natin yung itsura ni line start. Nandito na po sa my left part and just, beside the center button. Nakikita natin. Next, ganun din. Gawa tayo ulit dito ng JButton pero this time it's btn4 equals to JButton, button 4, and instead of line start, page end. So technically, we are trying to put a button sa my right part or beside center pero sa right part niya naman. And do not forget to add that inside the panel. btn4 border layout dot page end. Ayan. So kung i-run natin ulit yan, asan na? Oops, nakalimutan ko maglagay nito. Ayun. Oops, page end pala dito, sorry. So, pag line end dito, okay, page end meaning sa pinaka-bottom. Ayan, sa pinaka-bottom. Pinaka-dulo. So, ilagay na nga natin yung btn5 is equal to new j button. Tapos this time, button 5 line underscore end. Ayan. So, let's add that btn5 border layout dot line end. Ayan yung sinasabi ko sa may right part ng center. Tingnan natin ha. Yun. So, complete na. So, kung napansin natin, this border layout manager simply uses the following. Okay, so meron tayong page start, meron tayong center, may line start, may line end, at the same time, page end. This is actually very useful kapag gumagawa tayo ng program kung saan meron tayong mga multiple buttons. So, you have to at least try to challenge yourself paano kung tic-tac-toe ang gagawin nyo. Diba? Halimbawa, tic-tac-toe na merong 0, 0 or tatlo. Diba? Ang tic-tac-toe merong 9, 3, 6, 9. Tama. So, you have 9. The question there, how are you going to place that using border layout? Diba? So, pwede pa naman kayong tumingin dito ng mga border layout na, ayan. So, you can also place them east, north, south, and west. You can also place them after the last line. Okay, may after the last line. Meron ding after the line ends, before first line, before line begins. So you can actually still use the following parameters here. Pero you have to make sure na gumagamit kayo ng border layout inside the JPanel. Ayan. Kagandahan na to, yan, kapag binabago nyo yung size ng JFrame, sumusunod din. Kasi we didn't really put a specific size of your JButton. So meaning, sumusunod yan kung ano yung pinaka size ng JFrame mo. Alright? So that's border layout na tinatawag natin. Next is what we call here flow layout. Now, when we say flow layout, it's the simplest layout in Java Swing, okay? And it places each components from left to right in a row using a preferred component sizes until no space is available in the container. So, ano ibig sabihin ulit niyan? This time, yan, gumagamit na tayo ng sizes, okay? Pero, every time naglalagay tayo kaya nga flow layout kasi every time naglalagay tayo ng button or nag-a-append tayo ng button sa mismong JFrame, automatic na sumusunod yung layout niya. Okay, gawa tayo dito ng class para mapakita natin siya isa-isa. Let's create here new Java class. Oops, nasaan na yun? New Java class, and let's name that as flow layout. Okay, so we have here a program. So first of all, import muna natin itong mga importante. Java.out. Okay. And let's also import javax.swing. Tapos the main method. Alright, so inside the main method is where we will now be creating our frame. And let's name that as frame. Tapos let's put a title. Flow layout demo. Something like that. Let's make the frame visible by adding first a default close operation. Tapos JFrame dot exit and close. Let's set the size into 300 by 150. And let's set its visibility into true. And later on, ilalagay natin ulit yung panel dito. Okay, so since gumagamit tayo dito ng flow layout, we have here a panel. Okay, panel in which this time, instead of using what we call the border layout, okay, this time flow layout na ang gagamitin natin. Flow layout. New flow layout. Yan, para shortcut. Alright, so inside this one, lagay na natin ngayon yung panel na to. Get content pane, then add panel. Okay, so alam na natin na kapag nirun natin yan, we only have a frame, and we already know that that particular pan or frame contains a specific panel. Okay, so mamaya pa pala, may error pa tayo. Tagalin ko na nga itong mga to. Yan. New flow layout. Okay. Next, lagay natin dito si JButton. Okay, btn1 is equal to new JButton. Maglagay lang tayo dito ng mga button, and let's try to analyze kung ano ang nagiging itsura niya every time we are trying to add a button inside the panel. So here, let's add that button, btn1. Okay, and let's try to run that. Ito, yan ako nga muna ito. Run. Oops, bakit ka nagkaka-error dito? Ako na nga lang ilagay ito. Ayan. Oops, I'm actually receiving an error here, which is really weird. So, sige, tapusin ko na lang muna. J-option. Tanggalin ko muna ito. Tapos tanggalin ko muna ito. Okay? Oops, ito pa. Tanggalin ko muna ito. Panel. Yan. So, yeah, it usually happens na kapag nagko-code tayo, of course, kakaroon ng error, especially kapag diba? Pagka mabilis kayong mag-code. Ayan. So, alam natin na meron tayong bakit ba gumagano to? Ayan. So, we already have here a JFrame. Bakit nawawala? Ayan. We already have here a JFrame, and the exit on close is clickable. Now, let's try to create the button. Ayan. Meron na tayong button din. And ilagay na natin siya sa loob ng mismong panel natin. Okay. So, JPanel, and this time, instead of using new flow layout. Okay. So, I hope hindi ito mag-error. Pero nag-error kanina, di ba? Ang weird. Ayun. Na. So, we have here a button. Unlike earlier, dun sa may mismong border layout natin, kung napansin nyo, naka-align na siya dito sa may top. Pero this time, since gumagamit lang tayo ng flow, kaya nga flow layout eh. Kasi free flow. Every time nag-add ka or nag-append ka, automatic, this button 1 will go here, button 2 will be here, and so on. Now, let's try to check and see kung ano itsura niyan kapag in-add na natin. So, JButton 2, we have here button 2, and we have here panel that add btn2. Okay. Ayan. So, btn2, mapansin nyo, yung button 1 umusod, yung button 3, nandito, yung button 2 andito. Now, if we will try to add button 3, based on the size that we have here, we are expecting that the button 3 will be here. Kakasya pa. Diba? So, tingnan natin. Button 3, button 3, panel that add btn3, and let's run that. Okay, ayun, kasya pa. So kapag button 4, since alam natin na hindi siya kasya, automatic, it will be placed here. Now, what's happening here is that, kaya nga flow layout, di ba? So, free flow yan. Every time nag-add tayo ng particular button, sumusunod yan depende sa mismong size ng frame natin. Unlike kanina yung sa border layout natin, specific yung paglalagyan mo ng button. Yan, so yung button 4, yun, dito na siya. So if we added here another button, di ba? Button 5, add btn 5. The button 5 here will now be placed beside button 4. Now, take a look at this one. Kapag kanilakihan ko yung size ng frame, horizontally, since this is flow layout, automatic, sumusunod yan. Diba? This is actually very effective kapag gumagawa kayo ng mga program or sample program na parang ang itsura niya ay mobile phone. Diba? Imagine kapag mga mobile apps, diba? Kapag mobile app, kahit na naka-horizontal yung phone nyo, halimbawa ganyan, tapos kapag vertical nyo siyang ganyan, sumusunod dapat yung buttons nyo. So, that's very effective with that kind of examples. Diba? So, if you have multiple buttons, it will automatically adjust itself. So, kapag ganyan, kapag marami yan, mag-adjust yan. Nagets ba natin yon? I hope yes. Alright, that's flow layout. Now, let's proceed with what we call grid layout. Now, grid layout places all of those components in a cell of grid. Okay? Cell of a grid. And each cell has the same size. Therefore, each component takes up the same space. Ayan, same space in a container when the user adjusts the container. The size of each component changes accordingly. So, burahin ulit natin to. And let's try to create another program here. JFrame grid layout demo. Yan. So, if hopefully alam niyo na itong ginagawa natin dito na gagawa ng frame, default close operation, JFrame dot exit and close, tapos frame dot set size, and this time 300 by 150, frame dot set visibility into true. Yan. So, after the JFrame, let's create another panel which is yan, JPanel. This time, we have here what we call the grid layout. Pero, take note, ang grid layout kasi gumagamit na ng specific na grid. Diba? So, the 3 to 1010 here simply means the grid layout, meaning 3 rows, okay? 2 columns. Anong ibig sabihin ng row? Ito. 2 columns with horizontal and vertical gap set to 10. Vertical gap. Yan. Set to 10. Kaya tinatawag na, kaya naglagay tayo ng mga parameters ng numbers sa kagaya niyan. Yan. So we have the 3 rows, 2 columns, horizontal gap, and vertical gap into 10. Tapos subukan natin siyang palit-palitan later on. Alright? And let's add the panel. Add panel. Yan. First, sige, lagay natin si button. JButton btn1 is equal to new JButton button 1. Okay, tapos lagay natin ngayon si button 1 sa panel. Panel 1 or panel that add btn1. So parang yung kanina lang, pero this time, grid layout na yan. So initially, hindi pa natin totally mapapansin to. Kasi isang button pa lang naman yung nilalagay natin. Ayan. So isang button pa lang naman. Once we added another button here, like this second button, to tapos lagay tayo dito ng panel that add btn2. We will now be able to see that the second button will be placed beside button 1. Not really beside, pero below. Okay? Button 1. And so on. Lagay natin ulit. Button 3. Ano mangyayari? Button 3. Ayan. Kasi 3 rows, di ba? 3 rows and 2 columns. Something ups. May error pala ako. Panel. Yeah, sure. This lecture will be posted in your Canvas account, so no problem. Okay? So you have here button 1, button 2, button 3. That's already 3 rows. Gawa pa tayo ng isa. Tignan natin. btn4 is equal to new JButton button 4. Let's add here panel that add btn4. Okay. Ayun. Pansin nyo? Since naglagay kasi tayo dito ng row na 3, napansin nyo, when we added the new button, which is button 4, automatic, the button 4 adjusted itself and naglagay na siya dito sa my right part. Hindi na siya nag-append below button 3. Because what we are trying to follow here is a specific grid layout. So, ibig sabihin, the grid layout here only works using this specific parameters here. So kapag binago natin to into 4 columns, you have to expect that pagawin natin to, that the fourth button, saan kaya siya maglalagay? The fourth button now will be placed, let's see, below. Ayan. Take note ha, yung horizontal gap na nakikita nyo dyan, yung 10, itong mga to, those are the horizontal gap. So kapag ka-zero natin yan, yung horizontal and vertical gap, automatic, magdidikit-dikit na yan. Diba? So, ayan. Tapusin natin. Gawa rin tayo dito ng button 5. Sige, button 6 na rin. Tapos ito, panel that add btn5, panel that add btn6. Okay. Let's run that. Yun, ganun palang itsura, di ba? So kung napansin nyo, every time na binabago ko yung size ng JFrame natin, ayun, yung button are actually fixed because it's still using this particular parameters kung saan we will only have 3 rows and 2 columns with a horizontal gap and vertical gap of 10. So kung babaguhin natin to into 4, the rows will be 4, automatic yung button 4 or probably this one, nandito na. pero 2 buttons pa rin. So, meron kang magiging gap dyan. Kapag 4 rows and 2 columns, pagkakaroon ka dito ng gap na dalawang bakante. Tingnan natin. Hindi pa rin. So, same pa rin. Since 2 columns pa rin pala siya. Yan. We can actually play around with this one for us to better understand what's happening dito. So, let's try to change the column into 3 naman. Oh, this is weird. Hindi siya magbago. So, eventually, dapat 3 na to eh. Bakit nga eh? Hindi ba siya nagsisave? Try tayo magdagdag ng isa pang button. Button 7. Yan, let's add that one here. Button 7. Oo nga, bakit hindi siya nag-update? 3 rows and 3 columns. Ayun. 3 rows and 3 columns. Diba? Kung napansin nyo, 3 rows and 3 columns. Yung kanina, ayaw niya eh. Hanggang 6 lang siya. And so, that's actually grid layout. So, pwede na tayong makakreate dito ng tic-tac-toe, no? Pagka tinuloy ko pa pala to. So, pwede kayong maglagay dito ng 8. Tapos, yan. Panel.add btn 8. And JButton btn 9. btn 9. Tapos, subukan natin yung horizontal gap niya is 0 pareho. Tapos, 3 by 3. Oops, may error. Ito pala. Ayan. Ayun. So, eventually, nakakreate na tayo ng ganyan. 'Di ba? So, depende nga lang sa size ng frame mo para maging square siya. So, one of our discussion later on is for us to make this button work. Na kapag ka nag-click ka ng something dito, may magpapakita. Either a J option pane dialog or a system.out.print line. It can be possible. Alright? So, that's that's grid layout naman dito sa J panel natin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Sakto. Okay, let's proceed here to what we call grid bag layout. Pag tinatawag naman natin grid bag layout, basically, it's the same as the grid layout, yan, pero it actually extends the capabilities of that one. So, kung nakikita nyo itong example natin dito, meron kang another button which is the button 4, pero this time, the button 4, medyo malaki pala siya. So, it allows the component to span to multiple columns or even rows. And in order for us to do that, this time, gagamit ka naman ng mga constraints. Ayan. So, may mga X and Y na tayong ilalagay dito. In order to use the grid bag layout, you need to create a grid bag constraints object and fill appropriate properties. Then you can add a component to that component or to that container using this one. So, we have the following grid bag constraints. Ito, yung grid X, grid Y na yan. Meron ka ring grid width and grid height. So, it will specify the number of rows. You also have the fill. Hindi naman natin totally magagamit ito. Especially itong grid bag. Kasi, yun nga, meron naman tayong mga J-panel kung saan yun na lang yung pwede nating properly arrange kaysa sa grid bag. Kasi, personally, nakakalito ito. Pero, maganda to in terms of the purpose kung paano mo siya i-implement. Pero let's try to check and see what will happen kapag ginamit natin to. Okay, so tignan natin ha. Let's create this. So we have here JFrame once again. New JFrame grid bag. layout demo. Then, let's create our JPanel once again. Pero this time, ayan, you have here a new grid bag layout. Now, tingnan nyo yung sa grid bag layout, wala tayong nilagay na parameter na numbers. But instead, we added here a constraints. Okay? Let's name that as CST. Kumbaga siya yung sasalo nung grid bag layout mo. So once again, yung grid bag constraints na yan, we can use the following properties inside that grid bag constraints naman. Okay? Now, let's try to, yan, we will place this, yung frame natin muna, set default close operation into exit and close, the size into 300 by 200 according here, get content pane that add panel. Okay, and the visibility into true. And, yan, lagay na natin sila isa-isa. So, first of all, tignan natin. We will try to add the button 1. Yung JButton, btn1 is equal to new JButton. Tapos, let's name that as button 1. Okay, so for the button 1, we will now add the button 1 inside the grid bag layout, pero this time we are using a fill. Okay, ano ibig sabihin ng fill? The fill property is actually used to resolve whether and how to resize the component when the component's display region is larger than the component's requested size. So the value of fill property are none, vertical, horizontal, or both. Tignan natin kung paano natin siya may apply. So, CST, meaning we are calling the grid bag constraints here, CST.fill equals to grid bag constraints dot horizontal. Now, since lalagay natin yan, maglagay tayo dito ng grid X. Ano ibig sabihin ng grid X? It's how or specify the row and column from top. So, from top to bottom and from left to right, starting from 0. So, example here, grid 0 and grid Y, meaning top left cell of the grid. Meaning the bottom one here will be placed automatically on this part ng JFrame natin. Pag 0 ha, so we still have to specify that. Grid Y is equal to 0. Ganyan siya. And in order for us to see this, we have to add the button inside the panel. Pero, we also have to put the grid bag constraints inside the panel. So, dalawa sila na ilalagay natin. Oops, meron akong error. Ayan. There you go. Oh, bakit na dito? Pero dapat dito yun, di ba? Since grid bag yun parang nagloloko to Dapat dito yun Anyway, sige, lagay natin yung button 2. btn2, new JButton, button 2, okay? And this time, let's add the second button here, but we will try to use horizontal pa rin, okay? CST.fill horizontal. Okay, CST.gridX equals 1. Ayan. So, para ka lang naglalagay ng X and Y values. So, dapat, since nasa gitna na yung grid or nasa gitna na yung button 1, the button 2 will be placed on the center. Okay. Tapos, let's try to add that. btn2 CST. Ayan. Kaya pala, sa gitna. So, considered na gitna yung grid bag natin. And constraints kasi natin is horizontal. So, talagang dito siya mag-i-start sa gitna, hindi dito. Yan, my mistake. So, dito siya. Since we added here a grid x value of 1 instead of 0, nandito na siya sa tabi. Pero yung y niya, ano ba ang x? Ang x lagi is yung horizontal, di ba? Ang y is yung vertical. So, for as long as yung y natin is 0, katapat niya lahat yan. Ito, kakatapat yan. Kapag x, dito yan nagbabago. Sige, lagay tayo ulit ng panibagong button here para makita natin kung ano itsura. Now, the button 3, let's try to add the third button. Pero this time, button 3. Okay, the button 3 here, CST, wala tayong nilagay na ano, no? CST.gridX. Kumbaga nilagay ko lang siya as is. Yan. CST.gridY. Tapos, we add here the BTN3 and the CST. So, currently, yung CST natin is ito. Okay. Ayun. So, since yung grid x natin is equal to 2, automatic nandito na yan. Now, let's ask ourselves, what will happen kapag pinaltan ko to into 1? Tingnan natin. Ibig sabihin, yung button 2 and button 3 have the same placement of 1. Ayan. Kung napansin nyo, nawala yung button 3, therefore, nasa ilalim kasi siya. Diba? So, nasa ilalim nito. So, hindi natin makita unless nilagay natin dito. Ito ganyan. So, now, what will happen kapag nilagay natin, nilaktawan natin ng isang grid, nilagay natin 3. Ayun. Kahit na yung value natin is still, or naglaktaw tayo ng isang grid x value natin, susundan pa rin ni button yung pinakamalapit. Diba, we are actually expecting na dapat may bakante dito. No, it's not actually like that pagdating dito sa itong grid bag layout na to. Sinusundan pa, kaya nga grid bag layout and we added here a constraints which is fill. Take note, we are trying to fill in everything. Diba? So, kahit na naglaktaw ka dito ng isa, hindi kasi alam ni program mo na merong isang laktaw dyan. So, automatic, ilalagay niya pa rin dito sa tabi na to. Okay? So, tingnan natin ngayon kapag nilagay natin si grid y into 1, what will happen? Kapag yung grid y natin is 1, there you go. Nakita natin na nandito na siya, bumaba siya ng isang grid. Ganun din dito kapag kay button 3. Let's try to add or change the grid y value into 2. Yan. So basically, ito kasi, itong purpose ng grid bag layout natin, para nga siyang grid layout, pero we are now trying to place these components here using a specific x and y values. Diba? And since we are using here a fill, automatic yan, kahit na naglaktaw ka, doon pa rin yan. Which is very useful. Kasi paano kapag may nakaligtaan kang isang, diba? Isang grid x or isang grid x value or y value. Okay, so balik muna natin siya into 0 para pantay-pantay. Let's add here another button. BTN4. This time, button 4. Okay. Tapos itong button 4 na to, subukan natin siyang palitan into a way, okay, kung saan, lagay tayo ng fill, grid bag constraints pa rin, dot horizontal, ayan. Pero this time, we will now try to set its width. Ano ibig sabihin na ito? Ibig sabihin, naglalagay na tayo ng particular size dun sa button kung saan susundan niya yung width din ng x value. Since alam niya na merong tatlong button which is 1, 2, 3 buttons. Okay, we now added a width of 3, which eventually will have the same size of button 1, 2, 3 na pinag-combine. Tingnan natin ha. Tapos yung grid X na ito is, lagay natin siya na nasa gitna, which is 2. Tapos yung grid Y niya is nasa, or siguro 0 na lang ito. Yung grid X natin is 0. Tapos yung grid Y natin is 1. Yan, para bumaba siya ng isa. Let's add the fourth button. PTN4 CST. Ayun, yun yung sinasabi ko kanina. So kapag nag-set ka ng size dito, na 3, same pa rin siya. Yan. Subukan natin palitan yung width natin into 4. Halimbawa. Same pa rin. Bakit? Bakit siya same pa rin? We are expecting na dapat pareho, di ba? I mean, nag-improve ng konti yung size nito. Hindi po ganon. Yun yung purpose ng fill. Horizontal, pero sinusundan niya kasi yung values na ito pa rin. I know this may sound really confusing, pero wag niyong, pwede kayong mag trial and error, pero ang purpose lang talaga na itong grid bag layout is for us to place each components or panels inside this JFrame into a much more specific placements. Kumbaga may X and Y values ka na kasi. Diba? O, tingnan natin kapag 2. Trial and error lang yan. Trial and error. Pag 2, yung value ng grid width, ayun. Pag 2, eventually, hanggang 2 sizes lang ng button ang kaya. Pero hindi niya kaya ang 4 kasi sinusundan niyang fill is hanggang 3 buttons lang. Diba? Tapos ang grid X natin is 0. So nandito siya, pero ang Y nandito. So 3 natin yan. Tapos lagyan natin yung last button here. BTN5. Oops. New JButton. Button 5. Let's add the last button here, which is cst.fill equals to grid bag constraints horizontal. You can actually play around with this one ha. So pwede nyo gamitin si grid bag constraints vertical. Tignan nyo kung ano ang magiging itsura niya. Grid x is equal to 2. So tama. So 0, 1, 2 nandito. Okay. Tapos grid width is 1. Grid y, greedy equals 2. So nasa third row siya. Okay. Let's add that. Panel.add btn5 CST. By the way ha, if you're coding, it's very important for you to add some spaces, possibly indentions kung kaya pa, para mas maintindihan ninyo. Okay, kung gusto nyo pang iganyan, mas maganda. Para aware kayo na itong mga frames na to, or buttons na to, is inside this JFrame. So, it all depends on you. Basta mas maging readable lang yung code nyo, mas maganda. Let's run that. Ayun. So, yung button 5, nandito sa may lower right part, it's actually because we place the grid X value into 2, which is 0, 1, 2. Nandito siya. Tapos, yung grid Y value niya into 2. So, this is 0, 1, 2. Nandito siya. So, 2 and 2. So, basically, para ka lang talagang nagpa-place ng buttons, pero you are adding particular values of grid X and grid Y. I hope na intindihan natin. Yun yung grid bag layout with constraints naman. So, meron ka ring weight, yung kanina. Yung iPad, hindi ito masyadong ginagamit kasi internal padding lang naman yan. No need. In sets, property is used to set the external padding of the component. No need. Most of the time, hindi siya ginagamit talaga. Pinakita ko lang is itong grid X, grid Y, and so on. Alright, do you have any questions so far? Magtanong lang po ha kung saan kayo medyo nalilito. Anyways, all of the codes here are inside your modules. So, nandito po siya. Nilagay ko po. Yan. Pwede nyo na i-copy paste kung tinatamad kayong mag ano. Oo, kasi nakakatamad pag-copy paste. Mas gusto ko nagta-type. Ayan. Next is what we call the absolute layout. Well, basically, kung nakikita natin yung absolute layout, medyo magulo siya. Pero the purpose of absolute layout is it will now allow the components to be moved and scaled freely from a container. Kaya nga absolute eh. 'Di ba? So to make a container accept absolute component, you have to set the container layout to nothing. Set layout into null. So to do it, you must define the x and y coordinates of the component as well as its width and height. And this is done by calling the method ito. Yan. Uh, Sige, explain ko sa inyo ha. Ito kasi, ang ginagawa naman nito, we are now trying to add each components into its very specific part of the frame. So, unlike kanina yung grid bag layout, nung napansin nyo, kahit na binabago ko yung frame size natin, as is pa rin siya. Static yung value or static yung placements ng button niya. So, it's still in the center and it's still in the horizontal fill. Unlike kapag absolute layout, kumbaga, you are simply putting everything depende sa bounds mo, sa placements mo. Sige, tingnan natin kung ano ibig sabihin yan. JFrame F or JFrame frame is equal to new JFrame absolute layout demo. Okay. So, frame.set layout into null. Anong ibig sabihin na ito? Set layout? Ibig sabihin, again, to make a container accept absolute component positioning. Absolute component, ha? You first set the container layout into this one. Frame.set or set default close operation into JFrame.exit and close. And frame.set size of the frame into 500 by 300. Frame.set visible into true. Yan. Okay. So, lagay tayo dito ng first of all button. New JButton. Click me. Tapos, lagay tayo dito ng JLabel or text. LBL1. New JLabel. Hello world. Lagay din tayo dito ng text field. Okay. Text field yan ha. Yung J text field na yan. Is equal to new J text field. Yan. Tapos, ilagay natin sila lahat sa frame. So, initially, let's see. Wala pa ako nilalagay na bounds. Nilalagay ko lang talaga sila as is sa frame. Wala rin tayong panel kung nakikita nyo. So, you have the button. We have the label. And you have here the F1. Okay. Let's try to run that and let's see what will happen. So, nilagay lang natin to lahat as is without even adding them inside the panel. Ayan. Kung napansin nyo, walang nangyari. Diba? Kasi nga, yung set layout natin is null. That's the purpose nung paglalagay natin ng null and paglalagay natin ng bounds. Kasi para maipakita natin na yung itong mga to can now be placed inside JFrame directly without even calling or placing them inside a JPanel. Set bounds. Let's put that in 20x, y 20, width and height of 80. Yan. So, nakikita nyo naman dito sa IDE natin, di ba? This is the x value, yung positioning, y value, the width, and the height of the button. Let's run that. Ayun. 'Di ba? So, meron na siyang specific size, 120 by 80. Meron na ring specific position, which is 20 by 20. So, kung 0, 0 natin yan, tingnan natin. Ito, okay to eh. Kumbaga, nagka-trial and error ka mas lalo. Kasi gusto mo siyang i-position ng bahala ka. 'Di ba? Unlike yung kanina, fixed yung position natin. Grid layout, yung grid bag layout, everything is fixed. Yan. So, kung gusto naman natin itong palakihin, halimbawa gawin natin square, yung itsura ng button ninyo, pwede rin. Ayan. So, 50 by 50 yung height and width niya. Pero hindi na makita yung label. 'Di ba? Sana all may label. 200 by 200. Tingnan natin. Ayun. So, kung napansin nyo, papasok lang yung value nito ng width and height hanggang dito sa may, eto, subukan natin Ang height niya is until 300. Lakihan natin, around 350 yung height niya. Tingnan natin kung lalagpas ba or ganun pa rin. Ayun. Pansin nyo, lumagpas siya kasi nga yung size ng frame natin is until 300 lang yung height. Pero yung nilagay mong button height is until 350. So definitely, ayun siya. 'Di ba? Papakita siya dyan. So ganun din dito rin sa label. Kasi walang nakalagay na position nito eh. So ito, lagay natin tong label 1 na hello world. Lagay natin sa may set bounds by 340 by 120, 100 by 100 yung text. Ayun. So, ibig sabihin, X value here is ito, from dito hanggang dito. That's 340 pixels. Since ang width natin, ng size natin ito hanggang dito, 500. Same goes through with the 120. So, from top to here is until 120. Now, yung width and height to 100. Tignan natin kung gawin nating 50 by 100. Ayun. So, kung 50 by 100, 50 lang yung width, medyo maliit yung pinaglagyan, 'di ba? Tapos yung height niya, sakto lang. Ang purpose kasi nitong width and height na to is, kumbaga imagine yung document natin sa Microsoft Word, 'di ba? Halimbawa, once you added a particular text field inside that, tapos maglalagay ka ng text sa loob ng text field, every time na ina-adjust mo yung value ng text field, nag-a-adjust din yung value ng text sa loob. So, kung ano yung size ng text field, dito kasi invisible, hindi siya makita. So, kung ano yung size ng text field, automatic sumusunod yan. Since the width is only 50, hanggang dito lang siya. Since we adjusted that from 100, na yung 100 hanggang dito, pag ganyan siya. Kumbaga may imaginary square dyan. If you will ask me, sir, can we change the font? Yes, definitely. Saka natin di-discuss yun. Pero possible nyo po na palitan yung font, even the colors of your text, even the, what do you call this one? Even the image of your buttons can also be changed. So, pwedeng hindi ganyan ang itsura ng button ninyo. Pwedeng kayong mag-download ng sample button sa internet, tapos yun yung ilalagay nyo dito. Possible din po yun. Tapusin natin itong program. Lagay tayo dito ng tf1 set bounds into 75 by 230 by 150 by 30. Ayan. So, text field. Alam naman natin ng text field, kumbaga, ayan. Kumbaga, 'di ba, text field, dyan natin ilalagay yung username and password. So, ayan. So, kung gagawa na kayo ngayon ng program kung saan i-ask nyo si user na gumawa ng username and password, 'di ba? So, you have here the username, you have here the password. Pwede kayong maglagay dito ng panibagong button. And once you click that, it will automatically check if the username and password na in-enter is actually the same. So, I think na-visualize nyo na kung anong magiging itsura ng program nyo in your finals using the following layout components or layout managers na meron tayo. Yan. So those are the layout managers that we have. Now for this module, you have a written work which I will upload, okay, and a true or false activity natin. Now for the programming exercise, take note, use any text editor tool, write a Java program based on the given statements or problems. Now, based on the output here, all you have to do is to create a program that will simply, you know, produce this kind of layout using border layout, this time border layout and grid layout. So, pinag-combine yung dalawa. Possible yon? Yes. Possible na possible po yon. Okay? So, that's for this module.